Hey everybody, and welcome back to Emerald City Hockey. My name's Dylan, and I'm here with RJ, and today we're going to be going over our projected Seattle Kraken lineup. So, jumping right in and looking at the forwards, one of the things you'll notice is, yes, we maybe don't have a typical first line of forwards that you might see where you have some superstar center with a couple like 30 goal scoring wingers. However, if you look at all of the forward lines all the way down the lineup, you'll notice that there's 3 to 4 kind of second line caliber matchups we have here, and that's pretty typical for an expansion team. Under the new expansion rules that the NHL has had, we saw that with Vegas, of course, and it served Vegas really well, especially come the playoffs, because it meant that 75% of the time, obviously it's not quite always equal because first lines tend to play more than fourth lines, but roughly 3/4 of the time you have you're at least on par or better than what the other team has out there as far as forwards go. So yes, we're kind of missing that star power up at the top, but I think the depth is going to be really key for the Seattle Kraken as the season unfolds and certainly come playoff time. So RJ, looking at this first line that we do have, we have Jaden Schwartz on the left side, we have Jordan Eberle at right wing, and at center we have Alexander Wenberg. Why don't you tell us about this line?
Yeah, so Schwartz and Eberle, obviously they kind of make sense. They're probably the team's two best wingers. Schwartz brings a great 200-foot game, but he can also score. Eberle is, probably the odds-on bet to, maybe lead the team in goal scoring. But the player I think we've gotten the most questions about in this lineup is Alex Wenberg. Now, he's normally played that third line center role with the Panthers, and he's kind of been more of a top nine rather than a top six guy over the course of his career. But Ron Francis has said that he does envision Wenberg in the top six. And I think the way that this lineup plays out and how the team looks, I think this spot kind of makes sense for him here. You put a lot of talent around him there in Schwartz and Eberle, and I do think he has the skill to keep up with these guys. He showed a bit more scoring touch last season in Florida, and I think he fits in really well on this line.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, you look at, Yanni Gord is probably the best center on the team, but I understand not necessarily wanting to have him be the top line center because, really what he's most effective at is being a shutdown guy, and you don't want to be giving top line minutes to your shutdown guy, and you don't want to be mixing your shutdown guy with your two best goal scoring wingers either. So I agree. I think Wenberg's the best fit. A lot of other people might be looking at Jared McCann, but I feel like Wenberg has a little bit more experience doing this or working with more skilled players. McCann was really buried on that Penguins lineup. So I like having Wenberg there. I think his presence will allow Jaden Schwartz to focus a little bit more on offense, which I think will be good for this team because that's partly why they brought him in. Because Wenberg's a really good two-way guy. Yes, I think he has more offensive potential than we saw most of the time in Florida. I don't think he's going to repeat the 20% shooting percentage that he had last year, of course. That seems, impossible. But I think his presence is going to do wonders for unlocking Jaden Schwartz's offensive talents.
Yep.
All right, so moving on to the second line. As I just mentioned, Yanni Gord is centering the second line with Brandon Tanev on his left side and Mason Appleton on his right side. Now, this seems kind of like the Kraken's shutdown line, am I right?
Absolutely. This is the shutdown line, and of all the forward lines, this is probably my favorite one on the whole team, and I think it would be a fan favorite as well. This line is going to be super tough to play against. So we all saw what Yanni Gord was able to do in the playoffs last season, and as you said earlier, he's probably the team's best center. But I think he fits well here. And again, you have to look at it as 3 second lines. This line could easily be the best at what it does. Brandon Tanev adds some bite to the line, and Mason Appleton is primed to be a breakout player. We've talked about him time and time again that he's ready to break out. This line is going to pretty much be able to do it all. They're going to outwork you for sure. They're going to play great defense, and you know what? They're going to be able to score. Yanni Gord, former 20-goal scorer. Mason Appleton, he's got some scoring upside. I mean, they really are going to be able to do it all.
Yeah, no, this is already my favorite line. Assuming this line is, an actual thing that happens, this would definitely be my favorite line. And you nailed it. They're gonna outwork everybody. Like all three of these guys have motors that are set to like 150%, and they just stay there all through a regular season and certainly deep into a playoff run. And I just think that's going to be something that will endear them to fans and also just make them fun to watch. Like, there's never going to be a dull moment when this line is out there because you're going to have the speed of like a Mason Appleton who could always, go on like a breakaway or something. You're going to have the physicality of Brandon Tanev, who's, always going to be looking to try to knock someone's block off. And then you just got the awesome two-way potential of Yanni Gord, who's, you know, as you said, he's just like one of the best two-way centers out there. So I'm really excited for this line. I could see some people maybe not wanting Tanev that high in a lineup just because he doesn't have, a history of being a top scorer or something. But I do think, you know, that won't be his role on this line, right? That's going to be Mason Appleton's role. That'll be Yanni Gord's role. His is just going to be to add that kind of physical element to go along with their two-way skill. And so I think it balances things out pretty well there. All right, looking ahead to the third line, we have Calle Yarncroke playing left wing, Jared McCann at center, and Jonas Donskoy at right wing. So why don't you tell us about that?
So this line is kind of the last of our three second lines, and I think it's going to be where we get a lot of our secondary scoring from. All three of these guys scored at a pretty impressive, like 40 to 50 point pace last season, and they were all effective depth scorers for their respective teams. You have two guys who can play center in McCann and Yarncroke, so that helps. I mean, you can kind of flip either of those two depending on who you want playing center. And then you have Donskoy, who really adds some creativity to the line. While this is technically the third line, I don't really think there's much of a drop off from lines 1 or 2, and I think you could see maybe even more scoring coming from this than you do the second line.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think last year was a really good kind of breakout year for a lot of people to see Calle Yarncroke's offensive potential. He started getting more like power play time in Nashville and working with the top six in various situations and roles, and that really excited me because I've been a fan of his for years. Jared McCann, I think it was also kind of a breakout year last year for him, for a lot of people noticing him finally in Pittsburgh. He was buried on that Pittsburgh lineup. He's maybe a little bit buried here. I think he will see more ice time in Seattle, and it'll be interesting to see what he does there. And as you said, Donskoy is the proven commodity here, really, where you know what you're going to get out of him, and that's going to be 15 to 20 goals, solid playoff performance every year, and yeah, I do think this will probably end up being like their second highest scoring line. And, depending on the situations, yeah, I could see situations where they have more ice time than the Yanni Gord line just because of matchups at home or something like that. All right, so finally, we have the fourth line, which has Marcus Johansson at left wing, Morgan Geekie at center, and our favorite, Colin Blackwell at right wing. So why don't you tell us about this? I agree. This is kind of feels more like a third line on most teams rather than a second line, but it's still got a lot going on.
For sure. And the fourth line does drop off a little bit from the first three, but looking around the league, I do think it's one of the best fourth lines in the NHL. You've got Morgan Geekie centering, and there's all the potential in the world there. The Kraken like his upside, and they certainly think he can kind of grow beyond that role. So it'll be a good place for him to really show what he can do. New free agent signing Marcus Johansson at left wing, who really traditionally has been a top 9 guy, or even top 6 earlier in his career, most of his career, and now he kind of gets to feast on some easier minutes. I think that'll be really good for him. And then, of course, you have Colin Blackwell, and if you're a longtime viewer of the channel, you've heard me rave about Colin Blackwell before. He is so versatile. He does everything the right way, and he'll improve any line he's on. So, I'm happy to see him anywhere in the lineup, but I think he's going to make this line a lot better.
Yeah, he certainly seems like the most, I guess, skilled guy. I know that's a little weird to say when you have Johansson on the other side, who's actually been a 20-goal scorer at one point in his career. But I just feel like he's probably going to be the guy driving offense on this line. Morgan Geekie, he hasn't had a ton of NHL playing time, but when he's been there, he's been like this face-off specialist, and I think that's going to be very valuable to have on a fourth line. Somebody you can just walk in and be a 55% guy in the face-off circle. So I'm excited to see him, kind of grow, like you said, in this role. I think that'll be good for him. I think Johansson will be, provide a good veteran presence for Geekie. Johansson has played center before, so I think they can work together on things. I guess one of the things when we then pull back and look at the lineups overall is I guess I could see Brandon Tanev and Colin Blackwell at some point maybe switching spots a little bit, just if they decide that Tanev maybe doesn't play the right style or at the same pace as Yanni Gordon, Mason Appleton. I think Blackwell can. He can kind of play that more up tempo hustle pace and provide a little bit more skill than Tanev can further up the lineup. And then Tanev, I mean, you want to talk about Morgan Geeky having someone around to kind of protect him from certain things so he can work on developing his game. I mean, Brandon Tanev can do that in spades. So that's one of the things I could see developing as training camp goes on, or maybe in earlier parts of the season as the lineup fluctuates, because that's again something we should talk about, which is the chemistry of this team. We're just kind of guessing at it right now, right? Almost all these guys have never played with each other before. Training camp's going to be really, really important as far as, building team chemistry, building line chemistry, especially figuring out who pairs well with who. And, that's going to be something to pay attention to once training camp starts in late September. So why don't you go ahead and fill us in on the scratches as we finish out the forwards here?
Yeah, we have four forward scratches. We have Nathan Bastian, who I just moved out of the lineup with Marcus Johansson coming in. We have Cole Lind, prospect from the Canucks. He's on the younger side. Alex True, the former Seattle Thunderbird. They just signed him to an RFA deal. And Carson Twerinski, the pick from the Philadelphia Flyers. A little bit more of an unknown commodity. But so, Dylan, are any of these guys guys you kind of see as threats to maybe hop into the lineup depending on how things go, or is there anyone I should have put in instead?
I think Bastion's probably the most likely guy. I think he certainly had the most playing time in the NHL last year of this group, and I think he showed the most potential. That being said, this team ended up really strong at winger all the way through the lineup, so it's going to be hard for him to break in. But for me, he would be my pick. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I like Bastion as a pick. I think he's going to certainly have to earn it at the wing position. I like Alex True of these four. He can play center. He has some experience there, and I liked what I saw in his limited action with the Sharks last season. Obviously, former Seattle Thunderbird. I think he'd be kind of a fan favorite if he came up. I do think he'll get an opportunity at some point to crack the lineup, and certainly with Yanni Gord being out to start the season, I think he might. If guys get bumped up, I think he might be able to hop into that fourth line center role.
Yeah, for sure. I could see that happening as well. All right. Moving on to the blue line. So our first defensive pairing is Mark Giordano and Jamie Alexiak. So why don't you fill us in on these two guys?
Yeah, and on the D as a whole, I think, we don't have that marquee number one defenseman that a lot of teams have. The kind we've talked about on the podcast is now getting like $9 million a year. But I think, again, we have like 3 second D pairs, right? And I think this is the first of that. We had a surplus of left-handed defensemen, so I've got Alexiak playing on his offside, even though he's a lefty, he's going to play on the right side. But I think this pair is going to be tough to play against, and that's kind of been a theme with this team. You have Giordano's experience, his veteran savvy, and still a lot of skill and a lot of ice time that he can eat up at age 37. And then you have Alexiak, the size, the punishing physical presence. This is a pair I would want out there defending a lead for sure.
Yeah, and not just this, the physicality of Alexiak's size, but also the reach that he has. Right, we've seen that for years with some of these taller guys like a Zdeno Chara or Dougie Hamilton. Just when you're 6'7", your wingspan and then the length of your stick on top of that just provides this insane coverage ability as far as poke checking and disrupting offensive players as they enter the zone. Yeah, I like this pairing. I think Giordano's going to bring, like you said, a lot of veteran savvy, a lot of leadership, which I think an expansion team needs early on. While guys are building chemistry, I think having a veteran like him around is going to be very beneficial to them. And yeah, yes, does this scream awesome first pairing that can go up against some other first pairings around the league? Maybe not, but I don't think that they're going to be far behind any of them. That's for sure. All right, so the second pairing, we have Vince Dunn and Adam Larson. So why don't you tell us about these guys, because this feels a little more like the offensive group of all of these guys.
Right. And I like this pair because the two guys kind of balance each other out a bit. Obviously, Vince Dunn is definitely the most offensively minded defenseman that the Kraken have, for sure. And he's going to, be tasked with playing that offensive role. And Larson is known for playing a bit more responsible, stay-at-home defense. And I think they'll both kind of play their role in this pairing and kind of bring a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that gets overlooked with Adam Larson for really forever, for the most part, has been his offensive abilities. Like he's not a total slapshot when it comes to offense. I've thought he's had an underrated slap shot his whole career. I mean, that was partly why he was really, considered to be one of the guys in the mix to go first overall way back in 2011, when of course his future teammate Ryan Nugent Hopkins went first instead, was the fact that he was a kind of a true two-way defenseman. Now in the NHL he's mostly shifted into a defensive role, but I think he still has some offensive upside that maybe a lot of teams or fans haven't quite observed from him. Vince Dunn, yeah, he's the team's power play quarterback. He's the point producer on the blue line. He's going to be the guy that can facilitate those kind of uh, long periods of time where you're in the offensive zone and just putting pressure on the opposing team's defense and net by just throwing pucks up there, hoping for rebounds, which is something we could talk about maybe later on with the power play units. So yeah, I like this pairing a lot. And then for the third pairing, we have Carson Soucy and Jeremy Lauzon. Why don't you tell us about these guys?
Right. So we know that Ron Francis likes size on the blue line. We've seen tough to play against as a theme here, and this is no exception. This is going to be another punishing D pair. Susi is 6'5", 211, and Lauzon, he's only 6'1", but man, he has that mean streak to him. We saw in the playoffs last year. And I would not want to play against this third D pair. You could even put them against some of the top forwards in a playoff series and just know that they're going to punish them all series long.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see. Both of these guys are guys that in their young careers have faced a lot of defensive zone start time. I guess I don't know how exactly to say that in a quick, easy way, but they're both guys that have been put in really difficult situations early on in their careers and frequently. They're both guys that start in their own zone 60+% of the time last year and really the year before that as well. So it's it'll be interesting to see if that's going to carry over to them being in Seattle. I think it probably will be. Uh, but they've proven that they can handle that, which I think is really important for a young defenseman to show that you can handle that kind of pressure of being put out there and knowing, okay, right away I got to be able to handle whatever the offensive throws at us. If they win the face-off, if not, then let's just move the puck out of here as quick as possible. So yeah, I think certainly as a third defensive pairing, I'd have to really look at depth charts around the league, but I'd argue this is probably top five for sure.
Mhm.
And then looking at the scratches, one thing we've talked about for a long time, there's just tons of NHL caliber defensemen on this team. So why don't you give us a quick rundown of some of these guys?
Yeah, this is the most interesting group of scratches that we have for sure, probably of any projected D scratches of any team in the NHL. And the thing that stands out right away is there's just too many NHL caliber player guys here that are left off the roster. And that's something that's going to have to be remedied at some point. One or two defensemen are going to have to get moved. That's just a fact. We know that Ron Francis kind of hinted that maybe they want to see how the guys perform in training camp before making that decision ultimately. But you've got Will Borgen, who I think should be probably either the seventh year on a third pair. Dennis Cholowski, who was getting time with the Red Wings last season in the NHL, and Hayden Fleury, of course, who's an NHL regular. So you're going to have to move some of those guys out. But Dylan, I want to know, who do you think is probably the lead candidate to get moved out, and who would you like to see kind of bumped into the lineup?
I think of these guys, it would probably be Hayden Fleury that's most likely to be moved. I think he has the most trade value of all of these guys because he's the most proven commodity. I think he's kind of proven that he can be a top four guy on a lot of teams, and there's just not really room for him here in Seattle. I think I like Will Borgen, as you said, as like their seventh defenseman. Young guy, missed a lot of time last year with Buffalo, which it might be good for his development. And I think, him getting some opportunities in the lineup, maybe playing some sheltered minutes earlier on, I think that could be really beneficial for him as he does continue to develop overall, because I think he has top four potential too. All right, and so finally moving on to netminders. Now we've talked about it a couple times before. You and I both think this is, at least top three goaltending tandems in the NHL, if not arguably the best goaltending tandem in the NHL. So in the 1A position, we have Philip Grubauer, Vezina Trophy finalist from this past season, and at the 1B spot, we have Chris Drieger, who was fantastic for Florida last year. So give us a lowdown, but I mean, it kind of speaks for itself, right?
Right. I mean, for my money, this is the best goaltending tandem in the NHL. You have two guys who both of them are in the top 10 in the NHL in a lot of the major statistical categories. You have a Vezina finalist here, and you have Drieger, who a lot of his numbers look even better than what Grubauer's have been over the last two seasons. I mean, you can't go wrong with these two guys. I used to have on the lineup, a goalie one and a goalie two, but I switched it to a 1A and 1B, and I think this is probably the most deserved of that 1A, 1B moniker in the whole NHL. This is such a great goalie tandem.
Right, and we've talked about it before. They're both on very good contracts from a cap perspective, so be able to have both of them at under 10 million combined AAV is phenomenal. I think the fact that both of them are probably going to see 35 plus starts this season is going to be great come playoff time. Yes, there will be questions if one of them starts faltering in the playoffs about should they make a switch, all that kind of stuff. But it means they're both going to be pretty fresh for a playoff run if the Kraken need them to be. And then at scratch we have Joey Daccord, who's kind of the odd man out, and I'm a little disappointed for him, or not disappointed in him, I should say. I'm a little sorry for him because he's a guy who a lot of people around the NHL have felt, he's really done a lot. He's proven himself in the AHL. He was probably worthy of getting an NHL spot to prove himself in the NHL this year, but unfortunately, he's just stuck behind these two, as you said, top 10 netminders in Seattle, so he's probably going to have to be down in Charlotte this year.
Yeah, it's a tough road ahead for him, at least in the short term. And right, I feel a little bad for him. He was getting opportunities with the Ottawa Senators last season, and I heard, from some people they thought he was the best goalie on that roster. It was kind of a toss-up who was going to be protected between him and Gustafsson, and he might have more upside than anyone else on that team. I like him also. I've been following him for a few years because I like the Arizona State men's hockey program, them going D1. He was a huge part of that. And he just seems like a great guy to have in the organization too. So I think he'll bring a lot to Charlotte. I think he'll help that team go far. And of course, all it takes is one injury. You never know as far as health in the NHL. Anything can happen. And I think they have a guy who can step in right away if there is an injury and be part of that goalie tandem.
Yeah, exactly. So it's never bad to have depth, as the last couple Stanley Cup champion teams have showed us, right? All right, so moving on to special teams. Now, this was something that we added to the site and added to our projected lineup a little more recently after the expansion draft happened, once we knew what the roster was actually going to be. You spent a ton of time researching all these guys' former special team usage, the coaches' special team usage, to figure out kind of how they like to do things. So why don't you give us a rundown overall of the power play, and then we'll break down the first and second units.
So the Kraken power play is going to be run by Paul McFarland. He's one of the Kraken's two assistant coaches, and he was in charge of running the power play with the Toronto Maple Leafs while Hackstall was there, so that's how he knows him. And the power play system they're going to run is what's called a 1-3-1. So a 1-3-1 setup means that you have one player who's kind of a net front position guy. His job is screening the goalie, deflections in front of the net, and he can kind of slide out behind the net sometimes for passing plays down low. You have guys on the left half boards and the right half boards, so that's kind of halfway down in the offensive zone on either board side, and those guys generally they can shoot one-timers, they can make passes into the middle, they kind of have a lot of options as far as what they can do, but they can kind of be the trigger men on the power play. Then you have a guy in the slot, also known as the bumper role, and a lot of the power play kind of works through him. He makes himself open for one-timers, passing from down low or the middle. He can deflect pucks in the middle, shots coming from the point, and he can also make passes back out. And he's kind of this pressure release valve for the guys on the outside. And finally, there's the point man. So that's usually a defenseman. They're kind of the power play quarterback. They run things from up high. They can kind of direct traffic and make passes down low, and of course, shoot from the point. So that's the overall power play setup. And so let's go through each of the two power play units and kind of where we have each of these guys. So looking at the first unit, we'll start with the net front guy, and that's Yanni Gourde. So Gourde has some experience there with the Lightning. He wasn't used a ton on the power play in Tampa just because all the talented players they have, he wasn't part of the first unit. But where he was used, and especially more a few years ago, was in front of the net. He's good at putting home rebounds. He kind of has that tenacity that's now used a lot defensively, but he can use that in front of the net, putting home rebounds. And he's skilled enough to kind of open himself up for passing plays down low as well. We've got Jordan Eberle playing the left side boards, and he's a right shot, so he can kind of open himself up for one-timers. He doesn't do that a whole lot, but he can do it. What I like from Eberle, though, is he's good at passing from that spot. He's good at starting set plays involving the slot, and he makes a lot of good passes to and from the bumper man. Jaden Schwartz playing the slot. He's played that bumper position in St. Louis, and he's pretty darn good at it. He's good at moving the puck back and forth quickly, and he's got a good shot that he can kind of open himself up for. So I like him in that middle spot. And Alex Wenberg on the right side boards. He played a little bit of net front in Florida and Columbus, especially in Columbus. I liked what I saw from him net front, so he can kind of do that too. But I liked him better on that right flank. And the reason I like that is because he can use his shot there. And I think he's got an underrated shot. He can kind of, when he's given time, he can pinpoint areas in the net and really take advantage of that. And then finally, we have Vince Dunn at the point. He's the clear power play quarterback. He's the most obvious one on this roster of the defensemen, and he's really good at that too. He can work plays from the point, he can make good passes, and he's got a pretty good shot too.
Yeah, I love Vince Dunn as the point man. I think he's going to be a great power play quarterback for this team. As I was saying earlier, he's going to be a great guy to funnel pucks to the net when needed. I like Yanni Gourde playing up front. I think one of the things you need more than anything to be like a shutdown guy is hockey smarts, right? And hockey smarts play kind of everywhere. If you're just smart about the game and you just have good instincts and intuition, you can play anywhere. But I think that's really important to have with whoever you have up front, right? They have to know where the goalie is to screen them. They have to know what their teammates are going to do to get out of the way and so that they're not blocking a shot, right? They have to know when it's okay to dip behind the net to go and get a puck and when to cycle it to certain places. So I think Yanni Gourde's going to be really good there. I agree with you. I love Jordan Eberle on that side. He's I don't know if it's just my perception, and I don't know if the numbers back this up. I should have researched it before we recorded it, but I've always felt that he kind of underperforms on power plays sometimes, or at least he has with the Islanders. But like I said, that could just be a misperception on my part. Jaden Schwartz, I love him in the slot. Winberg, as you said, I think him and Gourde can be really good, kind of cycling back and forth between each other. So I think this is actually a surprisingly good Unit 1 power play, considering they don't have like a superstar, 40 goal scorer kind of guy on the team. I think this unit can be really effective. So why don't you tell us about the second unit power play?
So I just want to say I love this second unit of the power play because everyone just fits their exact role so well. I mean, this was really fun putting this together because as I'm researching for, okay, well, who fits where? Everyone fit perfectly into their place. And we'll start with the net front, Jonas Donskoy. So he's a versatile player. He can kind of play that left side boards if you want him to, but I really like him net front. He's an underrated tipper of the puck. If you go back and look at his highlights, like he's got some crazy deflections that he can do, so shots from the point, he's great with that. And I love what he does as far as screening the goalie. He has really a sixth sense for that kind of thing. As far as when to get out of the way, he's good at moving screens, kind of going into a goalie's vision and then quickly out right as the shot's coming. So I think he's a good choice for net front. As for Kalle Järnkrok, we mentioned that a little bit earlier. The one-timer. You wouldn't think about it from a player like him, where he's traditionally been more of a defensive player. But man, just let him stand in that left slot boards and just fire those one-timers. Like, look at the one-timer highlights from Kelly Yarncroke. Like, he's got a heck of a shot there. So absolutely, put him in the OV spot, let him go. Um, then Colin Blackwell, and another one. Like, where do I start? Like, I rave about Colin Blackwell all the time. And as I was doing the research and kind of looking for examples of what the bumper roll is supposed to do and, how to do it well, it seemed like there was an example for every little role, every little thing from Colin Blackwell. He's great at doing the high tip up in the slot. Like, you have point shots coming in from him, he can tip them. He's good at the one-timers, kind of releasing and finding that little soft spot where he's uncovered when the puck's down low. And he's good at making passes to kind of relieve pressure on the power play. Colin Blackwell, pencil him in right now as the bumper on the second unit power play. I think like that spot is meant for him. Jared McCann, he was pretty good on the right side in Pittsburgh too. He played on either second unit power play, worked on the first unit a little bit. As a lefty there, I think he fits well for the right side, and he's good at moving the puck around and kind of making plays. And then Mark Giordano, he's kind of the only other option we have as far as a power play quarterback for the second unit. All these other guys are bigger and more defensive oriented. You've got Adam Larson, maybe, for the point shot, as you mentioned, but you've got like Jamie Alexiak, Carson Soucy. These guys aren't really guys that have played on the power play much before. And I should mention that on a second unit power play, a lot of times you'll have two defensemen and three forwards, but I think this just works out better with four forwards, given the personnel the Kraken have.
Yeah, I think the only other defenseman that could possibly do it is Adam Larson. So I agree with you there, and I don't have a problem with this setup of still having four forwards on the second unit at all, because I think it's going to help keep pressure on opposing teams' PKs, which is that really a bad thing ever? So what I love about the three in the middle is they're all so versatile. I feel like they could all, they all do those things as you said really well, but they can also kind of all, interchange with each other at times too, right? We've seen Yarncroke in the bumper roll occasionally. We've seen him net front even, just because he can do anything seemingly. Jared McCann, I like as the setup man, kind of on the right side. I think he's the one that kind of most so has to stay fixed there. But Blackwell, he's good coming in off the sides too. So it could be really, there's a lot of potential here that I feel like you could do a lot of really cool organic free flowing things on the power play where guys, they don't just cycle the puck, but maybe they cycle themselves a little bit and really try to create some confusion for other teams' defense. So I'd be really excited to see this power play work if it does indeed happen.
Yeah, and
So,
one more thing, watching the Paul McFarland power play when he was running it in Florida, there was a lot of movement of guys, like you mentioned. There's just a lot of moving pieces and guys kind of switching positions with each other. It was a little more stagnant in Toronto, but I'd like to see some of that movement come back, and maybe the second power play unit is a place you could have it.
yeah, for sure. It's a good catch. So, of course, power play is only half of the special teams game. Why don't you fill us in on the penalty kill for this team?
Yeah, so the first PK unit, we have some really great defensive players. We've got at forward, we got Yanni Gord, who, I mean, we know what he can do. We've seen his clutch shorthanded goals. I mean, this was a no-brainer putting him on the first PK unit. And Kalle Yarncroke, versatile guy. He can also step in and take face-offs, play center. He can do anything you want him to do. I mean, these forwards, like, you can't get a better PK forward group than this. And then Mark Giordano, again, that veteran presence. He played a lot on the PK in Calgary. He played a lot in every situation. But I think you want him there as on the first unit. And then Adam Larson, we talked about, you said he was a little underrated, on the offensive game, but he has done really well in a defensive role. So I think this is probably where he belongs.
Yeah, I agree. I think Larson can handle first unit penalty kill minutes and pressure and all that kind of stuff. Yes, the gluttony of these great two-way forwards that the Seattle Kraken have makes it so that it'd be hard to really mess up the penalty kill for this team.
Yeah.
Yanni Gord, as you said, he's going to be fantastic. Giordano's going to be fantastic there. Yarncroke's going to be great. You could see him maybe shift down to the second unit if you wanted a face-off man there. But of course, looking ahead, spoilers, Wenberg's down there. So yeah, I like him with Gord. I think they're both very cerebral players, and they can do some interesting things. One thing maybe is missing a little bit would be speed. Mason Appleton, I could see maybe being added at times just for if you want to keep pressure on the other team. Maybe you have momentum going into the penalty kill and you want to try to keep that momentum. You want a speedster out there. He could replace Yarncroak there, but yeah, I like it. There's no reason to think this won't be one of the top penalty killing units in the league. That's for sure. So why don't you fill us in on the second unit, which still seems like something a lot of teams would love to have as their first unit.
Right. No, the second unit is certainly not much of a drop off there. You've got Brandon Tanev, and I needed to include him on the PK because of, I mean, just the energy he brings, and he's had a lot of PK experience, and man, he's good at it. He's tough to play against if you're a power play guy. He's good at getting in lanes, and he's good at using that physical element too to kind of force turnovers and stuff when the puck does get jammed along the boards. So he can do that and kind of supply that pressure. And then Alex Wenberg, he'd be obviously the center here, kind of the guy taking faceoffs. You do need a good faceoff guy on the PK. And, Wenberg isn't the best at faceoffs, but he's a center. And he actually played a lot on the PK in his career in Columbus and Florida. So I was surprised to see that he had so much PK time when I looked into it. But yeah, he's definitely been there, done that before, and I think he'd be good on the second unit. As for the defense, this is going to be a tough unit to stand in front of the net. If you want to stand in front of the net, get in the goalie's eyes and screen, good luck. You've got Jamie Alexiak and Carson Soucy to deal with. I don't see anyone winning a net front battle against these two.
Yeah, that is probably going to be, the least enviable position of anything when it comes to playing against the Seattle Kraken. I love that pairing on defense. They both have size. They both have reach. They can disrupt, any sort of, setup plays that you have going on just by getting in the way with their long reaches. Obviously, as you said, the physicality is there. Tanev brings the physicality and energy from a little further up. I mean, go watch any of his time playing, on the penalty kill anywhere he's played, and you'll see a guy who loves to pressure opposing teams' point men. Like he has no problems going between the half boards and the point, just constantly to make sure that no one has time to set up, no one has time to make a good pass. Everyone is feeling pressure and having to move as quickly as possible, which is not something you want to be doing on the power play. Wenberg, like you said, we've been kind of saying all along when we talk about him, he's just a fantastic two-way player. So having him out there is, going to be great for them. And then, at any time, if any of these guys get injured, you have, Colin Blackwell you can throw in there. You have Mason Appleton you could throw in there. These are all guys that have some experience on the penalty kill, and not just, oh, they have some experience playing there. It's like they're actually pretty good at it too. So I think this is going to be one of the places where we might see the most movement early in the season, just as they try different matchups out, as they try different people in the role. Or like I said, they might just play it a little more situationally, where they kind of have like a third unit of forwards that they bring in certain situations if they want to play a faster style of game or something. So it'll be really interesting to see overall how the special teams play out. Mm-hmm. But that is our projected Seattle Kraken lineup. As always, please leave a comment down below with your thoughts. Plenty of you have left thoughts on Twitter as we've been posting the images of this. I'd love to see it here too. Love to get all of your opinions on it. And as always, subscribe to the channel if you can. It doesn't cost a thing. Like this video, and we will see you next time.